Why did Hollywood try to silence Brendan Fraser? He wasn't just another leading man. In the late 90s and early 2000s, Brendan Fraser was everywhere. Charming, funny, larger than life. From the jungle vines of George of the Jungle to the ancient tombs in The Mummy, he was Hollywood's golden boy. A star that audiences loved and studios banked on. Then, silence. No headlines, no blockbusters, no Brendan. For years, he vanished from the spotlight. Rumors swirled. Burnout, injury, personal issues. But no one really knew the truth until one quiet, tearful moment at an awards ceremony when the world finally asked, what happened to Brendan Fraser? The answer isn't just about lost roles or bad luck. It's about what happens when someone dares to speak out in a system built on silence. This is the story of Brendan Fraser, not the Hollywood icon, but the man behind the smile and the pain he carried for years. Before the silence, there was a rise so rapid, it felt unstoppable. Brendan Fraser wasn't born into fame. He was a theater kid, Canadian-American, soft-spoken, the youngest of 4 brothers. His father worked in foreign service, so Brendan's childhood was scattered across continents. He wasn't raised in red carpets and limousines. He was raised in transition, but there was something about him. He had presence, vulnerability, a goofy sweetness wrapped inside a leading man's body. He wasn't polished. He was relatable. That's what made him different. And Hollywood noticed. His breakout came in 1992 with Encino Man, a ridiculous comedy that somehow worked, mostly because Brendan made the absurd lovable. He could grunt and stumble like a caveman and still make you care. Then came George of the Jungle in 1997. Brendan wasn't just funny, he was fearless. He committed. The physicality, the innocence, the timing. It wasn't just comedy, it was charisma in motion. The audience adored him. The industry saw a new kind of star. And then, The Mummy. In 1999, Brendan Fraser became a global icon. As Rick O'Connell, he was Indiana Jones with better jokes. The film grossed over $400 million. Sequels followed. Action figures, posters, Halloween costumes. He was everywhere. But he wasn't just a blockbuster face. He could pivot to drama. Gods and Monsters proved that. He held his own alongside Ian McKellen. Directors praised his emotional depth. He even conquered Broadway with Elling. By the early 2000s, Brendan Fraser was among the highest-paid actors in Hollywood. Big studios chased him. Audiences loved him. Critics respected him. He was the full package, and always, always smiling. But what no one saw was what it cost to stay that way. Because while Brendan's star was rising, something inside him was starting to break. For a while, Brendan Fraser made it look effortless, but behind the scenes, he was breaking. The roles demanded everything, emotionally, physically. He was the kind of actor who did his own stunts. Over the years, that commitment came at a steep cost. He shattered his knee, injured his vocal cords, damaged his spine. One role after another, his body absorbed the impact. Between 2001 and 2008, Brendan underwent multiple surgeries, partial knee replacement, back surgery, even a laminectomy. At times, he could barely move. He was in and out of hospitals. And yet the cameras kept rolling. But it wasn't just his body that was breaking. In 2003, something happened that changed everything. At a luncheon hosted by the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, the group behind the Golden Globes, Brendan was allegedly groped by Philip Burke, the organization's president. Fraser didn't speak about it publicly, not then. He just retreated, quietly, unseen. The incident shook him. He fell into a deep depression. "I felt like something had been taken from me," he would later say. "I felt like the horse from Animal Farm, old and used up." Soon after, his personal life began to unravel. His marriage ended. His mother died. The roles stopped coming. The phone stopped ringing. Hollywood didn't blackball him outright. It was more subtle than that. A cold shoulder, a deafening silence. He was no longer bankable, no longer in demand. And so, he disappeared. From red carpets to rehab, from $20 million contracts to side roles in forgotten TV shows, from global icon to ghost. People whispered, burnout, too much surgery. Was he ever really that good? But none of them knew the truth, because Brendan Fraser had been wounded in a way Hollywood doesn't talk about. And when you're hurting in silence, no one sees you fall. Brendan Fraser never made a public scene. He didn't lash out. He didn't write exposés or give explosive interviews. He just faded. But in Hollywood, silence speaks volumes. After the alleged assault in 2003, Brendan confided in a few people. His wife, his publicist. He requested the HFPA issue a formal apology. They did. Quietly. No headlines, no accountability. The organization dismissed it as a joke, a misunderstanding. Then, they moved on. But Brendan couldn't. He started to notice a shift. Calls that used to come weekly stopped. Meetings that once seemed automatic vanished. Franchises he helped build went forward without him. Was it the surgeries? The depression? The whispers? Or was it something worse? He would later say, "I felt like I had been blacklisted." Not officially. There was no memo, no blacklist document, just an industry that knew and looked away. Studios didn't say no. They just stopped saying anything. He wasn't invited to the Golden Globes anymore, not even as a guest. And remember, this was a man who once brought in hundreds of millions at the box office. Now he was struggling to pay alimony. He filed to reduce child support, citing lack of income. The same man who once topped Forbes' highest-paid actors list, and still he didn't speak. Because when Hollywood turns its back, it doesn't slam the door. It leaves it open, just enough to make you hope. So Brendan waited. Years passed. He took small roles, voiceovers, stage appearances, anything to stay close to the thing he once loved. But in an industry built on image, his silence became absence, and absence became irrelevance. Until one day a quiet little film came knocking, and with it, the first flicker of light in a very long darkness. It didn't happen all at once. There was no big announcement, no viral trailer, no magazine cover screaming, "He's back!" Just a quiet return. In 2016, Brendan took a supporting role in the Showtime series The Affair. His face had changed, rounder, wearier, quieter, but his presence was still magnetic. It wasn't the Brendan Fraser audiences remembered. It was someone deeper, sadder, real. He followed that with Doom Patrol, a strange superhero series where he played a broken man inside a metal body, both literally and metaphorically. And then came No Sudden Move with Steven Soderbergh, where he held the screen like a ghost, returning to haunt the room. People started whispering again, but this time it was different. Then in 2022, everything changed. Darren Aronofsky, known for directing raw, devastating performances, cast Brendan in The Whale, a film about a reclusive man battling obesity, grief, and guilt. It was the kind of role Brendan had never played before, the kind of role that required scars. And he had them. He disappeared into the character, not just with a prosthetic suit, but with every tremble of his voice, every tear, every breath that felt like it might be the last. It wasn't acting. It was lived pain. It was survival. The Whale premiered at the Venice Film Festival. After the final scene, there was silence. Then, a standing ovation that lasted over 6 minutes. Brendan wept. The room did too. For the first time in decades, Hollywood didn't just see him, they felt him. This wasn't a comeback fueled by nostalgia. It was a resurrection, raw, earned, and unshakably human. Brendan Fraser wasn't chasing fame anymore. He had found something greater, the courage to exist, scars and all. Brendan Fraser didn't just win over audiences with The Whale. He reminded the world what real acting, real vulnerability, truly looks like. Critics called his performance heartbreaking, career-defining, a masterclass in empathy. But for Brendan, it was never about awards. It was about being heard again, not as a character, but as himself. And then came the moment, Oscar night, 2023. He sat quietly among Hollywood's finest, a man who had once stood outside the room, now sitting at its center. When his name was called Best Actor, the theater erupted.
And the Oscar goes to Brendan Fraser.
But Brendan didn't rise like a victor. He rose like a man still in disbelief. His voice trembled. His hands shook. His tears? Real? "I started in this business 30 years ago," he said, his words halting. "And things didn't come easily to me. But there was a facility I didn't appreciate at the time, until it stopped." He didn't point fingers. He didn't name names. He simply gave thanks to those who offered him a second chance and to those who waited for him in silence. He was no longer the action hero, the punchline, the has-been. He was a survivor, a man who had been crushed and rebuilt. In that moment, Brendan Fraser wasn't just winning an Oscar, he was reclaiming everything he had lost: his voice, his worth, his space in the story, and the world stood still for him. Hollywood, the same machine that once turned its back, now stood up and clapped. But more importantly, millions watching at home saw something they'd never forget: a man who had every reason to give up, but chose instead to speak. Because sometimes the greatest redemption is simply being seen for who you really are and being loved anyway. Brendan Fraser's story isn't just about Hollywood, it's about what happens when someone chooses truth over silence and dignity over fame. He didn't claw his way back to the spotlight. He waited, he healed, and when the moment came, he spoke, not with anger but with grace. This wasn't a Hollywood ending wrapped in applause. It was something quieter, more honest. A reminder that behind every headline, behind every disappearing act, behind every smiling face we think we know, there might be a story still unfolding in the dark. Fraser's journey matters, not because it's rare, but because it's real. It speaks to anyone who's ever been hurt, ignored, broken, and still found a way to keep going. We often celebrate loud victories, the big wins, the dramatic turnarounds, but sometimes the most courageous act is survival. Quiet, invisible, incomplete, but survival nonetheless. And maybe that's the point. In a world that rewards noise, Brendan chose quiet. In an industry that forgot him, he remembered himself. And in doing so, he reminded us of something we too often forget. The most powerful comeback is simply refusing to disappear.